Let's forget about the partisan rancor for a bit and look at what is really going on in the country outside Washington, outside the Beltway. And I suppose the big question is America in decline? Is it headed for trouble? Is it in a nationwide depression of sorts? Or is it vibrant as ever, thriving, growing, innovating? Joining me now are James and Deborah Fallows, the husband and wife authors of Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America, and Stephen Brill, a journalist, entrepreneur, and the author of Tailspin, the people and forces behind America's 50-year fall and those fighting to reverse it. So, Steve, let's start with you, because I think you paint a very important picture that I think people don't adequately understand, which is that a core element of what has made America great, the kind of upward mobility, the social mobility, the ability for bright, hardworking, poor people to move up, has kind of been arrested or stagnated in various ways and for various reasons. So lay out what that problem is.
Well, what I decided to do when I set out to write this book was try to understand why it seemed that the core values, the core qualities that make America great seem to be in decline, whether it's the ability of Washington to get anything done, the kind of bipartisanship we used to enjoy on big issues, whether it's the income mobility that you just mentioned, whether it's the monetization of our democracy, the inability of people without money to have anything that approaches an equal voice. And what I found was that our core values in many ways had been hijacked. The First Amendment had been used by corporate interests to dominate our politics. Meritocracy itself had some unintended and not good results.
So when you hear this, Jim Fallows, I know you and Deborah went out into the country and you saw some surprisingly optimistic things. But you've lived, both of you, in Washington on and off. You know this world that Steve Brill is talking about. How do you make sense of that piece of it?
So I think over the years, we've talked about China, where Deb and I used to live, and made the point that in China, everything is simultaneously true someplace in the country. And I think that's the case with the U.S. The U.S. is not quite as chaotic as China, but it's a similar thing where we agree with all the pressures Steve is talking about of sort of distorting the U.S. distribution of income, of opportunity, of the corruption of politics in the past generation. And what's interesting to us, and we feel that is, it's becoming better and better understood. It's an obvious part of politics. Steve has laid it out in his book. We're talking about a part we think is not as well understood or realized, which is this contrary renewal, reform, dispersed effort across the country of people saying we can find ways to create different opportunities for people whose parents might have worked in giant factories. Those factories aren't there anymore, but these people can have jobs in the wind turbine industry, or they can have them in the robotics industry or whatever. Of the amazing role of immigrants and refugees, which despite the national rhetoric, which is so poisonous on this topic, city by city, places that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, immigrants and refugees are stimulating the economy. They're running city government. They're very important civic leaders. And so our sense is there are two Americas, but in a different way from what we're usually talking. There's the America of national politics, which is so dispiriting and near a near historic low point. And there's this other America not fully recognized of people inventing new ways to get things done at the local level.
Deborah, describe the journey. I mean, what exactly did you guys do?
Well, it wasn't 30,000 feet. It was actually 2,500 feet across the country. We were in our small plane for 4 to 5 years, not nonstop, but going from...
This is a tiny single-prop plane.
Single engine.
This is a little propeller plane.
This is not NetJet or ExecJet. It's a little propeller plane where we would hop from town to town and stay in these towns for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And coming in at very low altitude, a soft entry to the town to get a sense of what it was like, and then staying at the Motel 6, going around to see a lot of all kinds of people in the town. We spent times in classrooms in schools with the mayor, with people who ran the YMCA, at brew pubs, in the hospitals, in the clinics with the doctors, to get a sense of, as much as we could, the variety of things and a sense of the energy or lack thereof that was going on in the communities.
And when you looked at it, what did you think was the telltale sign of vitality? Was there one? Was there sort of something that you could look at and say, this place is going to, this is going to be a better story than we might have thought?
We have at the end of the book 10 and a half signs of civic success, the half being whether it has a craft brew industry, that being a proxy for a certain kind of entrepreneur or a certain kind of urban expansion. But more, in one way or another, all the various signs come down to, are there people who view the welfare of that town, that region, that state is something that matters to them in the long run. They're not just consuming what is there. They're not just living in their own household and maximizing their own wealth, but they're saying it matters to make plans for 20 years from now to build a community college in Central Oregon where they could have opportunities.
So kind of long-term proprietary interest in the society.
Exactly,
But why would people have that? Everyone is so short-term oriented now.
But not really, because
Don't generalize.
yeah, the older people in the town are looking to the young people who they want to come to the town to save it, to move it forward.
All right, when we come back, I'm going to ask Steve Brill how these bottom-up forces are going to solve the big top-down problems that we face. So you heard this, the fallows perspective I would characterize as the Tom Friedman one from a recent column, which is, if you want to be optimistic about the country, stand on your head because everything looks better from the bottom up. But the kind of problems you outline, the government is deeply partisan. It can't get anything done. We haven't built any serious infrastructure for 30 or 40 years. You have, a deadlock on, you can't get scientific research done. You have money capturing politics. These are all big problems that, I mean, I hate to say, but the fact that the mayor of Sioux Falls is doing a good job, or that some community is doing, has a good public library, it isn't going to solve these huge problems.
I don't agree. I think it will, because I think the solutions come from the bottom up, especially when the up is totally paralyzed. And people who see those solutions and are disgusted about the macro picture will start to support political leaders who want to spread those solutions. You don't have to go far from this studio. I don't have a prop plane even, to find examples of that. There's a converted zipper factory in Queens that I write about, where a veteran of the Iraq War who went to Harvard, a Harvard graduate, decided to start a job training program where he takes people who are sales clerks or they're out of work baristas, people with average incomes of $18,000 a year if they have incomes. And he has a job training program for them where they learn to be coders, computer coders. And 11 months later, it's a free program, they graduate into jobs averaging $85,000 a year in the tech industry. Now, that can be done.
All right, I still remain somewhat skeptical that with all these little micro efforts, the estimates are we need to spend something in the range of $3 trillion to rebuild American infrastructure to make the economy competitive.
Actually, a little more.
Yeah.
More. So where's the money going to come from?
So here's first, exactly what Steve is describing around New York is what we've seen in Mississippi and South Carolina and Fresno and all of the other places. So our experience is exactly the same on that. I can imagine two futures. Here's the future I hope for, which is that the accumulation of real-world, real-time experiments happening in thousands of places right now will produce both ideas and sort of identify problems and produce leaders who could say, I've done this in Brooklyn, I've done this in Fresno, I've done this in Minnesota, and these people will have more and more influence on national politics. That's one future I hope is the case, that national politics will be leavened in a positive way by this constructive effort from the bottom up. The other possibility is that national politics remains in crisis, and then at least it's better if we have this healthy local fabric than if we don't. So one way or the other, it's worth paying attention to this part of America that generally has been missed in the national media, which I think in our different ways we're all trying to do.
The one thing I'd add is that if you look at the 2016 election, what is crystal clear is that people were frustrated and disheartened with government. Now, they decided to choose the same person who convinced people that they should enroll in Trump University to solve their problems. But I think that the country is learning that lesson, that you really need people who are qualified, who are prepared, and who have the kinds of answers to the problems that plague America that we need,
You think
and the
so?
place to look at them.
The 40% who still support Trump doggedly?
Well, actually, 40% means that there's 60%. Yeah. So, I don't think you can thread the needle with, 70 votes in the Electoral College, with 70,000 votes scattered them in 3 states every time. The other thing I'll add is, you asked where's the money? We are undertaxed in this country. I mean, the tax burden for wealthy people in this country, and even for the middle class, is way below what it is in any other developed country.
But there isn't the political will to do that.
Well, if enough water mains break at the same time, and enough bridges collapse at the same time, and enough of the power grid goes out at the same time, we will understand that it's an emergency. We have a slow-moving emergency with infrastructure that is fast accelerating, and people will get disgusted.
Deborah, let me ask you, when you would talk to these people, at the local level, what was their feeling about national politics? Were they sort of hoping that they could then go on and run it? Were they deeply frustrated?
When we went into the towns that we visited, we never asked people about national politics. We went in asking about, what's your town like? What's going on here? What drives you? What do you need? What are your problems? How do you fix them? And national politics did not come up either from, certainly not from us or from the people we talked to, except for a very few times. We started this in 2013, and it was really about 2016, at the time of the conventions, that people started talking about national politics. And it really felt to us like there was a distinct disconnect. The energy, the drive, the thoughtfulness was about, what can we do locally? How can I have an impact on my town? And then there was this other thing that was national politics, which if you ask that question, you'll get an answer like you can hear on any cable news show. But it wasn't what was driving the energy of the people, and it felt more like, when you go to make your national vote, are you Republican or Democrat? You're what you've always been, or it's a.
So no matter what you're doing day to day on the ground, when it came time to vote, you were tribal, and you just voted for your tribe.
Yeah.
Which has become more and more bitter. And you're mentioning earlier taxes. We saw it, and we write about places, very conservative areas in Charleston, West Virginia, in Dodge City, Kansas, and in Columbus, Ohio. People voted themselves tax increases to improve the library, to improve downtown infrastructure, to keep city services going. So if people can have confidence in their leaders and see, the output from, there is a willingness to say, yes, we should do our part.
We have to close it on that. And one thing I can say is that the hopeful note is that these books, in very different ways, illuminate America so much more interestingly than the kind of focus on Washington politics. So thank you for having written terrific books.